Hi all, I have a very interesting notable game to show you from the World Cup. Mamedyarov was playing white against Caruana in round 4, so the first classical game, 4.1. So this is on the 20th of September 2015, yesterday from this video. d4 from Mamedyarov, and Caruana plays knight f6, after c4, g6. The first surprise, usually knight c3 is played here, control the e4 square and threaten position the e4. Very unusual move from Mamedyarov, which kind of gets the opponent improvising, I believe. Bishop g5. So it's almost like a delayed Trompowsky. The Trompowsky is like Julian Hodgson's weapon of choice when he won the British Championship several times. And Caruana could have carried on normally here, relatively speaking, with bishop g7. Because black's controlling that e4 square, so this position like normal Grunfeld, but instead Caruana ventures knight e4 and the bishop drops back, c5, and here with c5 black's putting pressure on d4 and preparing something like this. So it looks as though this is an interesting attempt to try and punish white. Queen c2, queen a5 check. There's only 9 games in Livebook here, so very surprising that they reached this position. After f5 we have some sort of Clarendon court structure emerging. Clarendon court is this like early c5 followed by f5. Here after f3 knight f6, d5 we've got a kind of Clarendon court structure after d6. Very rarely seen at Grandmaster level. And it's thought to be positioning, the Clarendon court is thought to be positioning a bit suspect. Grandmaster Jonathan Levitt has used it a few times and done a video about it, etc. Many years back, but I don't think it really caught on that much, this structure where you've got this c5 and f5. The problem is, fundamentally, well, there's a few problems. Potentially e6 is vulnerable, e4 potentially with e5 later. e4 is played immediately here. Knight a6, as though knight b4 is going to be troublesome tactically. Now a very calm move indeed. Knight e2, just to be able to go to c3 to support the e4 pawn. F takes e4 was played here, and we have f takes e4. Now white has ignored this possibility of knight b4 at the moment. It doesn't seem that dangerous. The queen, if it carefully steps back to b1, it holds the d3 square, which has been interrupted from the bishop. So knight b4, white can just carefully, I believe, play queen b1. No problem. So black plays bishop g7, and we have knight c3 now, covering the d3 square, castles. And now it seems as though black might be threatening both knight g4 and knight b4. In combination, knight g4 would actually hit the bishop. So white addresses, it seems, this issue here of the bishop with bishop e2. And the thing is, in this position, you might think, okay, the bishop's loose. Well, knight takes e4. We can play queen takes e4, protecting the bishop. So you might try and get that working with knight b4 first. This wasn't played. In the game, knight h5 was played. But if we try and get knight e4 working with knight b4, in this position, it's getting pretty dangerous. On queen b1, actually knight takes e4 becomes possible, it seems, looking at the bishop. And if queen takes, it's just really dangerous with bishop f5. This is a really dangerous position. Let's have a look. Let's absolutely check this 100%. This position here, bishop f5. Yeah, where does the white queen go? Knight c2 check. And this kind of position, well, white's falling to bits. And if king f2, again white's falling to bits. But it turns out that white's not so easily bustable with this forcing move. of knight b4 here, and I found this fascinating. It seems queen c1 is adequate, so indirectly protecting the bishop. So on knight takes e4, knight d takes e4, and white's fine. There's nothing much going on here. Say this, we've got king d2, and white's materially better, everything's fine. So black can't bust white, but he plays a really strange move. Maybe he's looking at that stuff. He plays knight h5. Caruana plays knight h5. It's a target there. Is it wasting time? Because now after bishop g5, white is just potentially threatening to take that knight and damage black's pawn structure. And he's also hitting, of course, e7. Does the knight really want to go back? Like if he just humbly goes back, white can castle and has a pleasant enough position. This position, what is the knight actually doing there? White can maybe build up on the f file with rook f2 and just double rooks. Let me turn that off, distraction there. So bishop g5, but here is where, I don't know, Caruana goes a little bit, I've never seen him go nuts, but this looks like a really nutty idea, queen d8. We have a worse structure now than the Clarendon court. White just takes on h5 and it looks really damaging structurally. And in many respects it is. Okay, white's given up the light square bishop. White can't castle at the moment, so he plays knight f3 to be able to castle. But isn't it fundamentally a problem, this h5? White tries to prove that in his next moves. So h6 first was played, kicking the bishop away from pinning that e pawn. Bishop g4, white castles, neutralizing the pressure on f3. e6, and now white shows great coordination. Queen d2, a battery, and also potentially another battery here to put pressure on d6. Black protects that, and now rook ad1, threatening d takes and queen takes. So black now, unfortunately, is closing up the position here, and this is a reduction basically in black's counterplay. After rook f2, what is black actually doing? He's closed in his own bishop. This h5 is a really bad target. Potentially knight c7, as though black might be playing to reroute his knight or playing for b5 later. Rook d f1. Now here, after rook b8, h3, nudging the bishop, it goes back. Knight e2, we have a simple idea, knight g3 now to hit h5. Or maybe, you know, if queen e8, then the knights can actually grab the f5 square. You'll have knight h4 and a knight landing on f5, and that would be terminal, this position. So black is not content, you know, with queen e1 here. This position is just asking for big trouble, you know, after knight g3, knight h4. Positionally, that's going to be terrible to get a knight on f5. So we see a committal move h4. The thing is, this pawn is fundamentally a weakness and a lever for g3 later. White plays king h2 with the idea of g3 later, and also potentially queen e1 to torture h4. Now this was a chance for black to try and drum up some counterplay with b5, counterplay in inverted commas, but he didn't. b5 wasn't played. Maybe it can just be ignored with g4 though, you know, and g5 on the cards. It's pretty dangerous stuff over here. Once g5 is in, then this pawn's like even weaker, and white's getting an attack potentially on the g file as well. This position, for example, there isn't too much black counterplay to worry about. White's just better there, but it seems Caruana wasn't maybe happy with that anyway. He played b6. This is just odd that the rook's there and b6. So white just carries on using this pawn now. He actually plays g3, given that black's not even opened the b file. He goes for this plan, g3, just to wrench open the g file. I mean, g4 might be good as well. hg, knight takes, although he's dissolved black's weakness. Knight h5, that weakness there is a problem. And again, you know, if black tries to hold that, then knight h4 maybe for knight f5. So we see rook g8, and it's a very juicy looking move, knight h5, just threatening now to take the bishop off and win a pawn. And it seems very little black can actually do in this position. If you look at black's pieces, they're not too amazing here. Knight e8, they're stumbling in this structure. It's a very restricted pawn structure for most of them. Knight takes g7, yes, just losing the h6 pawn, and with that losing control of the g5 square. So immediately knight g5 check and knight e6 would be like potentially winning the queen. Black plays knight h5, trying to keep control of the g5 square a little bit, but no, knight g5 is still possible here. So if king takes, well, there's even knight f7 check, as well as knight e6, just winning the queen, etc. King g6 was played, and it's total slaughter time. Rook g1. This is a bad position, but believe it or not, Caruana is like high ranked in the world. He's like over 2800. He's like rank 4 in the world, and he's just been completely crushed here. It's like there's all of White's pieces are just gunning for his king here, and look at this guy. Look at this guy. The black piece is not doing anything. It's slaughter. It's a complete slaughter, this position. Queen e7 was played. Knight f7 check. King h7. And if black dreamt of playing queen h4 at some point to attack here, it's extinguished. Bishop g5. We see queen e8. And now simply queen e2. Yes, trying to get the queen to that h file. This is really bad news. On knight f4, I think White can just simply just play rook takes f4 to keep hold of the knight for a moment, just to get the queen over here for a mate, or nearly a mate. Yeah, it's going to be a mate with something like this, and then yeah, this is like mating. So yeah, once the queen gets to h5, that's it. Knight f4 is not possible. Knight g7 was played, and it's slaughter time. Rook f6 with the idea of rook h6, checkmate. Rook f8. White just plays check, and now finds a really neat finish to finish the game. Can you see what White plays in this position? If I give you 5 seconds, starting from now. Okay, bishop f6. Looking to take on g7, so queen doesn't really want to give herself up. So we have rook takes f7. But now the final move. So White sacks that piece. We've got this gigantic pin here, and the bishop's covering an exit square potentially. White just plays queen h5, threatening mate. Yes, this is not too pleasant. Black resigned here. Next move, whatever he does, is actually getting mated. Whatever black does, he's getting mated next move. Incredibly, takes. Here, mate. What does black do? There's no defense. King here. Rook h8, mate. Yeah, so after queen h5, it's forced mate next move. It's an unbelievable game. It's a shocker. From Caruana, one of the highest rated players in the world, Mamedyarov shows he's really dangerous. And given a weakness on the king side, he's going to hunt down your king, whoever you are, even if you're in the top 5 in the world. The king was hunted down here. It was brutal. This was a brutal game. Black didn't seem to have much counterplay, and that's very rare for Caruana. The structure was weird. It was like a Clarendon court gone wrong. The Clarendon court wasn't a brilliant opening in any case. With the early c5 and f5, it was never really caught on. But here it seemed to be a bad version of the Clarendon court. So yeah, it seems very early on the surprise move. Caruana reacted perhaps too appropriately with knight e4 instead of just carrying on trying to transpose back to normal lines, because in that territory it's just brand new territory. Very little stem games to work from, etc. A shocker. Comments or questions on YouTube? Thanks very much.